You're listening to The Practicing Law Librarian. This limited series is part of PLI's Ever Current podcast, where we bring you insights and updates from legal thought leaders. Find additional episodes at pli.edu or wherever you get your podcasts.
Hi, I'm Karen Oesterle. Welcome to the Practicing Law Librarian podcast, presented by PLI's Legal Information Services Group. This podcast brings you conversations with and for the law librarian community. As a practicing law librarian myself, I've been working in legal information services for 34 years, currently with PLI's Library Relations Group. For this episode, join us as we talk to Loretta Orndorff, a valued member of the Philadelphia law librarian community. Loretta's groundbreaking work on the AALL salary survey has benefited every law librarian, and her learnings from the ever-evolving kaleidoscope of legal research tools are second to none. Loretta Orndorff began at Cozen O'Connor in 1997 and retired as library co-director in 2021. Quickly completing her bachelor's and MLS degrees, she next added her JD and served as chief librarian and library director at 2 regional firms after working reference at Villanova Law School. One of her primary gifts to the librarian community was her recruitment of new law librarians, as well as her work on the AALL biennial salary survey. Created in 1993, this survey evolved over time to become the important tool it is today. To read Loretta's full bio, please see our podcast page. Welcome, Loretta.
Thank you, Karen. Always a pleasure.
Yes, ma'am. Do you want to speak just for a moment about how we met and know each other?
Well, Karen, you were my LexisNexis book rep. And you would come in and you would sell me books. And then when ebooks became a thing, you would come in and you would expertly demonstrate the ebooks on a laptop upside down. I mean, you were amazing. You were like Ginger Rogers. You know, you did it just as well as Fred Astaire, but backwards and in heels. Yeah, I was very impressed. And then we kept seeing each other at the American Association of Law Libraries at their annual conference, and we became friends. And one day you said, "What do you think about me doing a master's in library science degree?" And I thought it was stupendous. And I actually wrote your letter of recommendation, if I'm remembering correctly. And the rest is history, as we say.
It's true. It's true.
Karen's, your intelligence and your service ethic and creativity just made pursuing a degree in librarianship a no-brainer. You're a natural.
Well, thank you. Thank you. I was very blessed to have a good mentor in you. It's funny, I remember that conversation differently. I came to you on one of our meetings and said, would I be able to work in a law library? Would I be able to work in a law firm? And you said, oh yeah, we've got marketing departments. We've got, competitive intelligence departments. And I said, no, I want to work in the library. Would I be able to get a job in a law library like your own? And you said, yes, you would. You're organized, you're smart, but you're always going to hit a ceiling unless you get a master's in library science. And I said, okay, I'll get one then. And I did. So
that is the truth.
Story probably lies somewhere between those two, but you did write me a recommendation, and I'm very thankful for it. Can you tell me about your interest in law librarianship and how that developed?
Well, I had none. It's slowly and bizarrely developed. I call it the Zig-Zag method. When I was thinking about what to do after high school, I had really enjoyed foreign language. It was kind of like a way into a secret world. And I thought maybe I should go to college. But nobody in my family had any college experience, and therefore they were very fearful and actually tried to discourage me. But I liked learning. I always enjoyed school, and I always enjoyed learning. Then in 10th grade, this is still high school, a national security agency recruiter came to explain an NSA program where for 2 years they would teach high schoolers Vietnamese, and then upon graduation we would start as a GS1, which is the absolute lowest level of job at NSA. And when the recruiter came and was talking to me individually, I revealed that I was thinking about going to college. And he sat back in his chair and he said, "Oh, well, you don't want this program. Go to college and then come back to NSA afterwards." And I said, "Well, what should I study?" And he said, "Well, Russian and Chinese." Boy, some things never change.
Yeah, that's true.
And then John F. Kennedy, of course, set us all on fire when he said, "Ask not what your country can do for you, but what you can do for your country." But most importantly, JFK backed it up with a 3% government in the student loan that was insured. And off I went in 1967 to the University of Maryland in College Park to study Russian. My mother had to agree that a BA in Russian was probably okay because it would possibly lead to a good government job. How bad could that be?
Right.
So she said, okay. During my orientation, one of the people from the counseling department at University of Maryland College Park gave us a little talk, and he informed us, and we all thought he was absolutely insane because here we were, freshmen in college, ready to start our first week of classes, and he was telling us that whatever profession we were preparing for, we would probably change 3 or 4 times during our work career. And we thought, how could this be? But that guy was really right. And it was a good thing to hear because otherwise, when things happened and we had to change and we had to adjust, it would have been harder. But he kind of gave us that idea that we had to be flexible. And that was really helpful.
That's an important learning right there.
It is. So my Zig-Zag was all over the place, and I was learning all kinds of things that I needed to know so that I would have the confidence, I think, to go forward and manage a law firm, library operation for a large law firm, because it does take a lot of confidence. During my college years, from 1967 to 71, the Vietnam War, the very undemocratic activities of the CIA, and me thinking of the world more broadly than the little patch that I knew when I was a child was also extremely important. The world got smaller, and I started to think of things more broadly, and that was very helpful when you're managing other people. After the social tumult of 1969 and 70, then my head was further turned because all of a sudden, and this was very new, women were supposed to have their own profession, their own money, and not just try to marry well. We weren't in the 1950s anymore. After graduation from college and while trying to figure out my new role as a professional woman, I remembered this lovely Texas librarian that was my boss when I worked a dreadful job in a sub basement in the acquisition department of my college library. It was tedious, stultifying, boring work. But one day, Anne, who was very sweet, pulled me aside and gave me a gift. She said, "Loretta, I think you'd make a good librarian." I was shocked. I was insulted. I mean, I thought she liked me. I really did not know anything about librarianship except for this one really awful job. But I tucked Anne's advice away for another day.
So that was your first library job. While you were undergrad, you were working in the basement of the law library at Maryland.
Yes.
And, you know, that's very similar to something that you said to Jill Peretta all these years later. You said to her, "You don't look like an attorney to me. You look like a librarian."
Yeah, it was like I hit Jill, who was my co-director in the end of my tenure at Cozen O'Connor. It was like I hit her in the face with a cream pie. This is the second day on her temporary job that she got working at Cozen O'Connor to see what a big law firm felt like.
Right. She was an attorney.
And she became a wonderful librarian.
Yep. And I just hadn't realized there was such an exact parallel. So that's the first library job that you had was at Maryland.
Yes. Yes.
And so then you went to law school? No. Then you went to library school.
Then I went to library school. So I took the GRE, and I graduated with my master's in library science, and I took this incredibly funky job at the troubled Branch 2 of the Baltimore free library system, which is called the Enoch Pratt Library System.
Okay.
And branch 2 was in a very difficult neighborhood. They gave me the job, I think, because I had taken a minor in counseling in college. I had worked in a factory, and I had jumped out of airplanes 3 times. So they figured, she can do it.
And you did.
There was also another girl at the same time getting her orientation, and she was an English major. She was placed in a branch where the kids actually read. They figured I could handle the discord of that difficult neighborhood with so many latchkey kids. That 2-year job taught me so much. Patience, where to draw the line, confidence in the human spirit. Latchkey children had such a hard life. How could I complain about anything, really?
Right.
I had a rocky start because I went in with all kinds of lack of structure and kindness, I thought would be the way to win over the kids. And of course, they ran all over me. Like when I would have a movie for the young adults, as soon as the lights went out, they would start throwing chairs across the room. So I was devastated. And my friend, who was the children's librarian, Felisko, said, Loretta, get King Kong. It's in 3 reels. Start on reel 2. And I said, but Felisko, how can you not show reel 1? Because that kind of talks about getting to the island. And she said, Loretta, listen to me. Start on reel 2. So I thought, okay, I'm going to listen to Felisko. So I set up the movie and I put on reel 2 and I turned out the lights and it's all this real scary music. And then these huge trees start to shake. And all of a sudden, King Kong crashes through and he goes, well, those kids were in their seats until the end of the movie. Felisko was right. So it was a learning experience that first year. And then by the second year, I had this terrible decision to make. During the first year, when I was utterly miserable, I had applied to law school because I thought I need an escape hatch. And then the second year, after King Kong, things started to improve and I got accepted to law school and I was really torn. And my co-workers at Branch 2 were a bunch of absolutely brilliant librarian and they were so good and taught me so much. They were the best. And they said, Loretta, you have to give law school a try. And they said, you're already very good at being a young adult librarian. You've got a knack for this. You can always come back if you don't like law school.
Right.
So I went off to law school. So my zigzag path to librarianship developed as I developed. And it was absolutely necessary for me to have the kind of tools that I needed. Not the tools that I learned in library school, but just the maturity, the confidence, things like that, so that I could grab onto a head librarian job and run with it.
Right.
As a kid, the only librarians I knew were the scary ladies at the public library, and they were always mad at me because my books were always late coming back. So I stopped going. And even in college, they were in the middle of changing the undergrad library from Dewey Decimal to Library of Congress. And it was so confusing. So I thought, I don't need this. So I was not thinking of librarianship at the time. Oh my gosh. So my myriad experiences with work experiences and all sorts of people. And I did get to travel. I traveled to Russia for 3 weeks and Thailand for 5. And traveling teaches you a lot. And that all really helped and contributed to my management style, which is basically hands off. I do not micromanage any of my employees. I hire excellent employees, people who are smarter than I am. I don't want people who are just as smart as I am. I want people who are smarter than I am with the right kind of service attitude. And I think we developed a really wonderful library. The team was just phenomenal.
The team was terrific. So I was going to ask you about library tools that you used and developed and how they were used by your people and by attorneys. But you've mentioned some other things like maturity and different kinds of experience.
And
But
also having being pushed in the right direction at the right time. I mean, my mother never stood in my way. She was amazing. She didn't understand, but she just had faith in me. That's important. That NSA recruiter said, nope, don't do this program. Go to college. Study Chinese and Russian.
Right.
JFK, he was very inspirational. He really, made our hearts soar. He was a wonderful orator, but then he gave us the 3% loan so we could actually go to college when nobody else in our families had done so.
Right.
And Armbruster, in a moment of absolute generosity, she told me that she thought I'd be a good librarian.
Yep.
Wow. I tucked it away and I used it later, but wow, what a gift.
Yep.
And my coworkers at Branch too, they wouldn't let me stay. They said, no, go try this law school thing. You can always come back. We'll welcome you with open arms. And of course, the generous and wonderful librarians that I met throughout my career were just wonderful people. I decided I wanted to be part of the library profession at that point. I mean, who doesn't want to hang out with the cool kids, right? I found librarians to be bright and interested and busy people. And by and large, most of them are very generous with their time and their advice. We all need mentors.
And you certainly modeled that in your library as well.
Yes.
You were a leader for the Philadelphia librarians and for your firm's librarians, and I imagine for the Villanova librarians too, and the other two firms that you were at before that. What do you think are some of the most important characteristics for a librarian to have?
I think you have to have an interest in many things. You have to be pretty broad-minded. The tools that you learn in library school, in all the courses that you take, they're great. But, going to law school does not make a lawyer.
Right.
Actually getting out and doing it makes a lawyer. And whether they're an okay lawyer or they're a really awesome lawyer or they change from one field to another in their practice, you have to kind of figure out what it is that really sets you on fire. And I really like the service attitude that I found with the librarians. They were just wonderful. They really wanted to help. And the thing with librarians is we actually don't know the answers a lot of times, but we know where to find the answers.
Right.
And so when the attorneys would come to us, it would be so interesting, the questions that they posed. But then if you do your reference interview correctly, you find out not only did they want A and B, they also needed C and D.
And then no idea.
They had no idea, but you figured it out.
Right.
And you gave them that, and they were delighted. By and large, they were really happy with the service that we provided. And that feels wonderful.
Right.
That really feels wonderful.
Right. That's another key to librarianship, I think. I'm sort of collecting learnings that you've come up with through your career.
Yeah, and working for a large law firm in a high-level capacity as a director, you also need to listen, and you need to find out what your firms need. Not necessarily what they say they want, but actually what they need. And if you can provide a library service which really gives the attorneys what they need, I think that's where it's at. We need to figure out what people actually need.
Right. I love that you said the two things they asked for, but also number 3 and number 4 that they needed and didn't know yet.
Right. Because the librarians know their collection better than the attorneys do. The librarians became the experts in researching Lexis and Westlaw way before the attorneys did.
Right.
They were the experts on using those services. When I started at my second law firm, I arrived on a Monday, and the previous Friday, the gigantic Lexis machine with the silver paper and the dial-in thing that you had to put your phone, you dialed the
You'd
phone.
put that phone down.
Right. And it went,
Yep.
and then you were finally connected. And one person at a time in my law firm could actually do research. Well, the librarians became the experts on that. And for a long time, there were different versions that came out, and people started having and using PCs on their desks. Then they were able to learn how to use it if they wanted, or they could just ask the librarian to please look up this question.
Let me ask you something, because I think we're in the same kind of space right now, a pivotal turning point. What do you see happening in law firms, like, for example, the law firm where you were for so long, with ChatGPT and AI?
Well, I think that AI, I'm not really sure about ChatBT. I'm not so sure about that. But I think that AI is like anything that's new. There's a whole big buzz about it, and then it becomes really integrated into the software that provides the services to librarians and attorneys. So I think that already we are starting to use a lot of AI technology to make the online legal research services much better than they were, say, 15 years ago. They started probably about 20 years ago trying to farm out brief writing to people who had JDs and lived and worked in, say, India.
Right,
And
different.
we never, my firms never did that. They did not want to let their content go out of the firm. They wanted their own attorneys who they thought were the best. Otherwise, they wouldn't have hired them, do the work. And they thought that that was a better work product. So I think that anytime there's a pie in the sky kind of AI or any other kind of new technology that comes around, I think it just takes a while to kind of sort through. But AI has become a very important aspect of the different services that lawyers use all the time.
Right.
Did that answer your question?
It does. It does. Thank you. How about some other tools, either maybe people on your staff that created tools or you created tools that were used in your library and that you shared with the attorneys? Does anything come to mind there?
The most important tool that I used was not developed by any librarian that I know of, and that was the Excel spreadsheet, because data has become so incredibly important. In the early days, in my first law firm, we had scads of books, and the attorneys, if they had a research question, they would come in and they would look in a legal encyclopedia and read something about the issues. And then they would get a couple of citations from the legal encyclopedia, and then they would go into see if there was any code law on it, and then they would do some research in the digests to see if there was any case law on it. Right. And then they would ask me maybe to see if I could run down a document or two, and I would go on to my gigantic Rolodex, which was my little computer, which had important names of people who knew things in all kinds of government and court situations. And I would call and I'd ask, John so-and-so, do you have anything on blah, blah, blah? I'm trying to find. And that was absolutely essential at that time, the telephone and the Rolodex and the attorney's initial book research. And then they would shepherdize and get more cases and statutes. And then they'd sit down and write their brief. Well, when I started at my second firm, I started to tell you the story, I think. The Lexus gigantic thing,
Yes.
console arrived, and I was directed to unwrap it and take it off the pallet and get it running, and then figure out how to train the attorneys. That was my first directive for management. So I went, okay. So that was very interesting. But, in doing all of that, I really got to talk to a lot of attorneys. And the attorneys thought that, and this was back in 1980, the attorneys thought that Lexus was going to make all of the books in our library, all the case books and digests, not useful. And that didn't happen for a long time.
And I know that you were very creative in the contract negotiations. Can I ask you whether you guys in the library, whether you were also in charge of CLEs, the continuing legal education? Not.
We were not.
Okay.
We were not. We were asked to help with the research, with finding art that was not copyrighted. We were sometimes asked for research kinds of topics to, participate more. And also some of the reference staff would go to departmental meetings and they would participate more.
Well, you were one of the first to embed librarians in the practice groups, if I remember right.
They did not sit in the practice groups. They always sat in the library. They were librarians first and last. And I know that a lot of firms, I think in New York, did that. But I really hated watering down my staff with having them have two masters. But when my staff went to a meeting of the commercial department, they listened and they learned what the issues were, and then they could make suggestions. So that was really good. That was a very good use of the knowledge brokers of the firm.
Okay. One of the reasons I asked about PLI is that you guys have what we call privilege membership. So the firm, anybody that works at the firm can get their CLEs as part of that flat rate. But I'm under the impression that you negotiated all the contracts. That's the main relationship that your firm has with PLI is the CLE, capability, the full access that they have.
Yeah, which is great, because PLI has a lot of really wonderful things. In the olden days, I used to buy the little books.
Yes.
Yes.
Well, we
would subscribe to them.
What do you wish, you've got such a zigzag entry path into law librarianship. What do you wish that you had known before you began as a law librarian or a librarian?
Well, our eyes are in the front of our heads. I've never looked back. I think that it's important to not worry about things like that. And also, I think it's very unfair to think that you would have current knowledge in a past life, because we have to learn, and humans always learn the hard way. And so, but those are good lessons. And so I think that learning all the things I did that were not necessarily library science, just learning how to be in the world, how to be confident in what you can do for other people.
Right.
Because this is a service industry,
Very much so.
Just like like PLI and Lexis and Westlaw and all the other vendors. The librarians and the vendors are very similar in that respect. We are in a service industry, and I always held my vendors very close, and I worked with them, and I let them know that it wasn't just about getting the contract, signing the contract. It was how the contract was going to work, how we were going to be able to make things better, how they were going to, how this new content was going to actually improve how the library could do its work for the firm. And of course, that all became, I'm talking years back, and is a little less service oriented than it became. And the account reps that I had were almost to a person, just very service oriented, really interested in helping me put my best foot forward in the firm through the use of their products. So it was a very good relationship. I always held my account reps very close.
Right. I do know that. And you did that with everyone.
I did that with everyone.
But you did, I have heard you say that before, and I love that. I just wrote it down again. You had vendor relationships such that the vendors would help you do your best for the firm with the resources that you had.
Yeah, because that got them the contract that they needed to make their quota.
Right, to make their numbers. I know I had asked you about tools, and you had made a LibGuide some time ago on legislative research in Delaware. Oh.
That was the funkiest little thing. Delaware legislative research was absolutely impossible because things were decided in dark, smoky rooms. And if you found any kind of a print committee report, oh my God, you were just golden. But that didn't happen too often. So I met with the Delaware Legislative Reference librarian, and we mulled over some of the facts of life of doing legislative research in Delaware. And I wrote a little guide, probably when I was at Villanova. And it was under my married name, which was Yaller, Yaller.
Right.
I went and looked for it because I thought, I wonder if it's still out there, and I can't find it. So maybe they retired it. I retired, and they retired it. But basically, what I needed to do was to help librarians who were going nuts, trying to find things that were not findable, know when they were done.
Right.
If you do these 4 things, and maybe this 5th one, you're done. You have done your due diligence. There is no more. And that was, when you're trying to get an answer for somebody and they are sure that something's there, sometimes it's not in these small states in their legislative materials.
Right.
So that's what that was about. That's probably the only user guide I ever did.
Well, the only formal user guide. I mean, no, I believe you had all kinds of processes for your librarians to teach them what you needed them to know and to teach them how to work best with the attorneys in your firm. You've alluded to it once or twice, and you sent me a little note about it, but I would love to get the story about the prison library that you were instrumental in helping with. Can you tell me?
When I was in library school, I did an independent study because the state of Maryland was being sued by the prisoners of Maryland, and the prisoners wanted access to legal materials because they were not guilty. They were, they needed to figure out a way to get out of prison.
And
so
did other states have these libraries already? Is that why Maryland wanted it?
No,
okay.
Nobody.
It was new.
I don't think hardly anybody had them because they would have been very expensive to maintain. And, like in the state of Maryland, you have maximum security, minimum security, and then you have like farm places where people sleep there at night and they go out and work during the day.
Right.
So you had all these layers of correctional facility situations. So I did a plan where I wrote up and I said, these are the 9 materials that you should have in your maximum security prisons. And these are the 5 that you should have in your minimum security. And I even had a bookmobile that would go from prison camp to prison camp with a typewriter so they could type up their documents. So
their briefs, right?
Yes, so they could get out of jail.
Their appeals.
And so then my mentor, who is very aspirational, she said, wow, I think you should send it to the judge who's sitting on this case. Now, this is way before law school.
Right.
So I sent it off with the best of intentions to help enlighten this poor man and help him make the right decision, right? Well, he and attorneys for the state hit the ceiling. Oh my God, they were so mad at me because I was interfering in a case.
Yep.
So I didn't get charged or anything. I didn't even get chastised. And I think I did get an A in my independent study.
But isn't it the case that now prisons have law libraries? And now it's a whole different game because the online services they have to be very, very, very careful with. But isn't it the case that most prisons have law libraries now? Oh, I believe that they do.
I hope that they do.
I believe they do.
I hope they have access because you know what the best benefit of all of this is? Yes, it's wonderful if somebody who is wrongly accused, convicted, can get out of jail, right? But there were men and women who were illiterate. And because they were so motivated to read legal materials in the hope that they could get out of prison, learn how to read and write.
Right.
It was kind of an amazing thing. I want to talk about the salary survey. You touched upon it, and I did serve for 2 years on the American Association of Law Librarians Economic Status of Law Librarians Committee, which does fabulous work for keeping the biennial salary survey as wonderful as it is. And as a administrator of a library, trying to move my people forward and get more money for them, for many, many years, I was pushed back and I was told that I could not use the information from the AALL biennial survey because it was self-reported, which is ridiculous.
Right.
So I took my Excel spreadsheet and I got a copy of Altman Wild, a copy of Special Library Association, and a copy of American Legal Administrators, and also their surveys, and
Right.
AALL. And I compared them. And then Femi Cadmus, who is currently the Princeton law librarian, said, wow, that's great data. So she took that and reworked it into an article in the Spectrum, which is an AALL publication. Mm-hmm.
Right.
And in November of 2009, the article that Femi and I did, entitled Law Librarians' Tool for Fair Compensation in the Best of Times and the Worst of Times. Now, in 2009, I was still having difficulty using that survey. So what I would do is I would use the data and make my arguments anyhow, and just not reference it. But I would not listen to not being able to use it because the charges of self-reporting were incorrect. All three of the surveys, AALL, ALA, which is American Legal Administrators. That was a very popular one in HR departments, and Altman Well, they were all self-reported. Nobody went out and kind of like got the information. Right. You got a link and you were asked questions, and you took the information that you got from your HR department from the annual salary review, and that's the information that you used in the survey.
Right.
So it was not self-reported in any. We were not making up numbers. We were using HR's numbers.
Exactly.
So it was really a good process to go through this, and it gave me the confidence after working with Femi Cadmus, gave me the confidence to just keep pushing. And eventually the HR department started asking me if they could have a copy of it was every 2 years, of the current survey. And Good. So then together we had a conversation. So that was really wonderful. And that, of course, started with me working to make sure that the survey on the AALL committee, make sure the survey was actually asking the questions and giving the information that the law librarians needed.
Right.
It was a very good experience. It really and truly was.
Well, it's a tremendous tool for lots of law librarians in the country and probably outside. So we really owe you a debt of gratitude.
Well, I had lots of help and lots of company and misery because I was not the only librarian who was hearing that. One of the first things I did in my libraries, in my career as a law librarian, was to use spreadsheets, Excel spreadsheets, to better understand operations such as budgeting. In my second law firm, that was a long time ago, but in my second law firm, my library partner would come to me and he'd say, Loretta, do you know that we spent X amount of money last year on the library on subscriptions and books? And I said, okay. He said, and he would say, this was the budgeting process. He would say, do you think you could make out with 10% more this year? 10% on top. Now, that's not how we budget these days. Oh my God. Those, the age of innocence was over.
Right.
But I used the Excel spreadsheets to record my cancellations, to record my new purchases, to record the ongoing subscriptions. And because it was so sortable, you could really use that information and analyze it so that you could figure out the arguments that you needed to make. Reasons why you needed this amount for this department's books. It was absolutely essential.
Right.
And in the beginning, the library expenses on the budget, so did we need those on the shelf? Well, so long as people could go on and actually use them, and not worry about a billable client, a billable matter to charge it to, yeah, they could. So when the policies changed and the way that we were able to use the content of the contracts changed, then we were able to really reduce the number of books. And before the pandemic, we had reduced so many of our book libraries and gotten them down to a skeletal fraction of what they used to be. I used to have floors and floors of books.
I remember.
And then you're in a situation pre-pandemic where those materials have really been so denatured because the young attorneys are not using those. And then the final nail in the coffin for a lot of those materials was the pandemic. And I've not been back to the firm since I retired 2 years ago. But I'll bet if I did go back to the firm, I'd have a hard time finding book collections.
Yeah, I think you're right. It's way down.
The world kept changing.
It's true.
Absolutely kept changing.
True. And that was one of your learnings from the beginning is things are going to change. Things
well,
are
my mother
change.
always said,
prepare yourself.
Loretta, my mother was born in 1921, and of course she was a young person, a young woman during World War II. And she said, Loretta, the only constant is change. She was so right.
Quite true. Let me ask you this, because now we are sort of looking at the time. If I could ask you about what you're reading and books that you would recommend. And I have to tell you, I bought Albion's Seed. I ordered it because, well, I couldn't find it in any library in the New York area. So I went ahead and bought it. I haven't read it yet.
Some of the things I do is I sing with a group, as you know.
Yes.
And I love singing. And I jumped out of airplanes in college, but I don't do that anymore.
Yep.
And then in the early 70s, I went to Russia and Thailand, which was absolutely fantastic. Those experiences are not replaceable by anything that you could read in a book or watch on TV. I mean, it's just so incredible to travel. You're a traveler yourself. I love Laurie King's Mary Russell and Sherlock Holmes series.
Okay.
It's Sherlock Holmes has retired from 221B Baker Street to Sussex with Mrs. Hudson, and he tends his bees. He has many hives. In 1915, a troubled teenager literally stumbles over him, and her brilliant mind wakes him up. He was ready to cash in his chips. He was so depressed. He thought his life was over, and then Mary Russell comes into his life, and she's just this brilliant young person with a mind that just sets him on fire again. Great. And so they have probably about 20 books, and they're wonderful books. I just love them. I read them and read them again. Laurie King also has a really interesting series about Kate Martinelli, a San Francisco homicide detective who lives with her partner and combines a very busy career with also raising her partner's child. Kate actually had a younger sister who died, and one of the books has her reinvestigating her sister's death. Very, very interesting. Another one that's really good, and it's a fast and easy read and totally enjoyable, is J.D. Robb's In-Depth series about a homicide cop, Eve Dallas, who is a homicide lieutenant in the New York City Police Department in the year 2058. And so the technology is a little bit advanced, but people are still the same, still doing the same rotten things.
Right.
So those are fun. And then Albion's Seed. I just love Albion's Seed. Actually, George Bush and Al Gore both read Albion's Seed in their preparation for their run because it came out in like 1989. And Professor Fisher, who wrote Albion's Seed, said that this book would be the first of a number of books. And true to his word, he's come out with quite a few other books using the data that he collected on these initial migrations and how that all affected people in different parts of the country. It's fascinating.
Yep. No, I've got it, but it's a substantial book. I have not started it yet. What a pleasure this has been. Nice to talk to you at length. Nice to see you again online.
My pleasure.
It's wonderful.
My pleasure.
Wonderful to be in touch.
Young librarians just don't get hung up on details and do a good job, service-oriented. It's a great profession. great profession.
Thanks for listening to The Practicing Law Librarian, part of PLI's Ever Current podcast. Be sure to subscribe and listen to our latest episodes wherever you listen to podcasts. And to learn more about the Practicing Law Institute, please visit pli.edu. To learn more about PLI Plus, which provides electronic access to the full collection of PLI Press publications, and schedule a demo with a member of our team, please visit pli.edu/plus. Please note that the views and opinions expressed during this podcast represent those of the individuals being interviewed and not necessarily those of PLI.